Good evening and welcome to our continuation of study of the book of Proverbs. Tonight is lesson 6, which is titled Wisdom and Family. You know, if there was ever a time in the history of the church, and really in the history of the United States, that people needed instruction and encouragement about family dynamics, I would say that time is right now. You know, a lot of families are spending more and more time together right now than they ever have. In probably the last 100 years, people are spending more time together now. There is a kind of togetherness that has been encouraged by everyone in our government, and so many of our families are together now. You know, isn't it interesting that the family dynamic in our country really had kind of spiraled downward at an alarming rate over the past several years? And now, in 2020, we're living through a situation where families are back together and even told to be together by our government. Our families are eating home-cooked meals together, spending time around the backyard fire, taking walks together, throwing balls together, just getting in the car and driving around together. I hope all of us are realizing how precious this time is. You know, as we've mentioned before, God is using this pandemic to produce amazing fruits in the lives of His people, and I hope that this will continue. You know, one of my worst fears about this pandemic and what we are currently learning about our families is that we as a people will not remember the lessons that God has taught us during this crucial time. I hear so many comments right now about how wonderful it is to be together as a family and how much the kids are enjoying mom and dad being together and doing things with them, eating meals together, playing games together. My question is, will we continue this kind of behavior once this storm is over? One thing is for sure and for certain. If we don't make it a point to continue being together as a family after this crisis is over, we will fall back into the same behavior we had as before. And probably it will get worse. So as we go through this study this evening, let's kind of keep these things in mind. Let's make the comment, for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. In other words, let's make a commitment to remember the lessons that God has taught us during this particular period of time. Well, let's take a look at a few of the words from Solomon about some of the lessons that he has for families. I really want to camp in Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 8 for just a little while. So if you have your Bibles, open up to the book of Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 8. Solomon says this, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching." You know, there's a lot going on in this one particular verse here. We see mothers and fathers and children all together and all have a role to play. So children are to hear, they are to listen. Fathers are to instruct, and mothers are to teach. So let's start at the end of this verse, and then I want to work our way backwards. Sons need to listen to their mother's teaching. You know, in my house growing up, Mom did a lot of the teaching for my brother and me. Some had to do with school, but most of it had to do with just life in general. First of all, she taught us about respect, and respect for her and Dad, and respect for other people as well. She taught us to be kind and considerate to other people. She taught us to be kind and considerate in our own home. If Mom ever heard or saw us behaving in some kind of unkind or ugly way, she would make sure and go find the belt of education and convince us that we needed to behave like she had taught us. She taught us to say yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am, and to this day I still use those phrases. I can't help it. It was so ingrained in me growing up. I just say yes sir and no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am, just automatically these days. She also taught us about responsibility. She gave us chores to do around the house. We lived out on a farm, and my job was to take care of the chickens. So I had to get up and gather the eggs together. Had to make sure they were fed. Had to clean the chicken coop. Also needed to take the trash out. We did big gardens together. Dad had we had 2 horses, and Dad had a few cows. And I remember getting together one day and dehorning the calves, and that was an event I will never forget. But it was about responsibility. And Mom made sure that we were doing the things that we needed to do. Learning responsibility was so important around our house. Making sure our bedrooms were cleaned up, taking the laundry out and folding clothes up, making sure our homework was done. Mom also taught us about honoring father and mother. You know, around our house, there was never a sass. There was never even a retort back to Mom and Dad. Mom taught us that it was not proper for us to sass, and it just did not happen in our family. Mom also taught us about roles and the authority in the home. You know, there was never a question in our home about who was the head of the family. It was Dad. Now, we would have family discussions, but Dad always had the ultimate choice. The ultimate decision fell to my dad. And that was never a question because Mom taught my brother and I about roles and authority. Dad had the leadership role, and you know, that gave us confidence, that gave us love, and it gave us dependence. It was needed, and it was understood in our families. You know, some of the things that Mom taught us, she taught by example. So we learned a lot of things just by observing Mom. But there were also some things that Mom taught that she taught by word and by deed. I learned a lot about what it meant to be a spouse by watching Mom and Dad. But I also learned a lot about what it meant to love because Mom would talk to us about her responsibility with Dad and the things that she did out of love and respect for my dad. When we were told to do some chore, for example, to take the trash out, Mom would tell us that. And she might have to show us how to get the bag out of the trash can and where to throw it. But it was something that she told us. So she taught by example and she taught by word as well. So moms, and we have a wonderful group of moms in our congregation. But moms, teach by example, yes. But teach by word and by deed as well. Teach your children what it means to respect each other and to respect other people. Teach them what it means to respect other people's things and other people's space. Teach them about responsibility and the importance of doing a job and doing a job well. Teach them how to honor father and mother. Teach them about the appropriate roles and authority and submission. The time moms have with their children is extremely short. You know, best case scenario, moms get kids for the first 8 or 10 years, and moms get to spend a lot of time with them before they go to school, and then for the first 2 or 3 years. But after that, the majority of that time, that important teaching time, is just gone. Don't miss that great opportunity to teach and train your children. So let's move back in the verse a little bit, and now let's talk about dads. Dads are told to instruct. You know, in our house, Mom and Dad both taught and both gave instruction, but Dad really was the one who gave most of the, what I would call, instruction. You see, the main difference here is that Mom taught us while we were young. And so that is, do this, do that. It was very simple things. Take the trash out. Mom taught us what it meant to say yes and no and stop that. But Dad primarily got to instruct us as we got older. And so as an example for this, Dad instructed my brother and me how to handle a firearm, how to shoot accurately. Well, that takes a lot of time. And so while we were out together, Dad was making sure that we were carrying the gun appropriately. Dad taught us how to shoot accurately, make sure that the barrel was always pointed in a safe direction. We would get home from the hunt and Dad would instruct us how to clean the gun, how to take the gun apart, get it put back together. Dad told us, he showed us, and then he let us experience. And that is part of this idea of instruction. Instruction involves engagement in the teaching and learning process. And fathers need to be engaged with the teaching and training of their children. This means devoting time, and a lot of time. You know, I love seeing the pictures on Facebook of families out fishing together. Now, you talk about something that requires patient instruction. Teaching a child to cast a lure, that can be dangerous at times. And I know some of you have probably had to go see Dr. Jeff and have lures taken out of your head or your arm, perhaps. I have been personally to see him twice for that. So teaching a child about casting lures can be very dangerous, but it takes careful and patient instruction. Riding four-wheelers, riding horses, hiking, backpacking, taking care of bigger pets like dogs or horses or cows, all of that takes instruction, and most of the time it falls to the father to give that type of instruction. You know, those are great times for mom and dads to teach, but also to instruct. You know, the third part of this proverb goes to the sons, and I would suggest the daughters as well. And what Solomon says is, you are to listen. Listen, my son. You know, mothers teach, dads instruct, children listen. Over 20 times in the Proverbs, Solomon will tell sons to listen, or they will tell them to hear, or he will tell them to pay attention. Notice a few of these. Chapter 1, verse 8, as we just mentioned, just read, hear, my son. Chapter 1, verse 15, my son, do not walk with them. So he's given instruction. He's trying to get the sons to listen to him as he gives warning about these evil characters that might be in the son's life. Chapter 2, verse 1, my son, if you will receive my words. Chapter 3 and verse 1, my son, do not forget my teaching. 4 verse 1, hear, O sons, the instruction of a father. 4 and verse 20, my son, give attention to my words. On and on these instructions go. My sons, hear, listen to me. So young people, please listen and pay attention to your parents. Solomon is repeating this instruction for you, to encourage you to listen to and pay attention to your parents as they teach and instruct, that you may learn the very best way to live and to avoid the dangers and the pitfalls of life. You know, scattered throughout these Proverbs, as Solomon tells the children to listen, he will give both benefits to listening and he will give consequences for not listening. Notice some of the benefits. Chapter 1, verse 9, he talks about the child will receive the victor's crown. What a beautiful image for the child. Chapter 1, verse 33, he who listens will live securely and will be at ease from the dread of evil. And then starting in chapter 2, verse 7 and following, he will say, you will have a shield around you. It will be pleasant with you. You will know right from wrong. It will be good for you. You will reap the benefits. You will be delivered from evil. A long life comes to those who follow the instruction of their parents. Your foot will not stumble. You see, kids, listen and learn from your parents, and you will be praised and exalted, and life will be better. Also nested among this instruction for children are consequences for not listening. You know, the consequences are many. Here are just a few. Calamity may fall on you. Dread will come like a storm. There will be distress and anger and anguish and death and destruction. There will be fear, anxiety. Your walk will be difficult and will be along a windy road. Kids, listen to your parents. Life will be better. You will reap the benefits, and you will save yourself from the consequences. I want to mention one more thing, but we're going to look at one more short proverb. Why does Solomon repeat this so many times? Why is it over 20 times that Solomon repeats this? I'd suggest to you that it's because kids need repetition. So we're back to mom and dad. Learn this lesson from Solomon. You need to repeat the instruction. You know, when I was taking care of the chickens, one time was not enough time for mom or dad to tell me. They basically had to tell me every day, Layne, did you get the eggs from the chickens? Layne, did you feed and water the chickens? They were very patient with me as I was learning and as I was trying to adapt this into my life. And parents, you will also need to repeat the instruction to your kids. Most children, not all, but most, need multiple times of teaching and instruction. You know, there's a lot going on in the mind and the body of a child. I don't believe that they are being rebellious. They are just changing. As children, their brains are developing, and they need the repetition. They need to be reminded. So parents, be gentle, be kind, be patient, and know that there are just going to be times when there's going to have to be some repetition. Well, I want to end our discussion about families from the book of Proverbs by taking a look at chapter 4. Chapter 4 is a wonderful summary for moms, dads, and the kids, really about everything that we need to know about functioning in a family. And I want to just take a look at three quick ideas here from Proverbs chapter 4. The first idea comes from verses 1 and 2. Solomon writes this, "Hear, O sons, the instruction of a father, and give attention that you may gain understanding. For I give you sound teaching. Do not abandon my instruction." You know, kids need to be reminded over and over again from their parents about the important things of life. But children also need to make it a point to remember what their parents have taught them. Solomon says, do not abandon my instruction. I saw a video this last week on YouTube. It was a 30-year-old woman who had been raised in the church, and she was kind of giving her own testimony, if you will, about why she left the church. And her reasonings were really very selfish, I thought, as she made her statement. And what I was reminded of was she abandoned the teaching. She abandoned the instruction that she had been given. Her dad was a preacher, and yet she had abandoned all of that teaching and was now following her own desires and her own wants. Children, do not abandon the instruction of your parents. The second section I'd like for us to look at is verses 3 through 9. Verse 3, and this is a real interesting section here. Verse 3, "When I was a son to my father, tender and the only son in the sight of my mother, then he taught me and he said, let your heart hold fast to my words. Keep my commandments and live. Acquire wisdom. Acquire understanding. Do not forget nor turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her, for she will guard you. Love her, and she will watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is acquire wisdom. And with all your acquiring, get understanding. Prize her, and she will exalt you. She will honor you if you will embrace her. She will place on your head a garland of grace, and she will present you with a crown of beauty." Now, I want for you to notice something here. Verse 3 is Solomon giving us some insight into life in the palace. He says, when I was a son to my father, that's Solomon, and his father is David, tender and the only son in the sight of my mother, that would be Bathsheba. He is remembering what took place when he was growing up in the palace. Now, here's what's neat about this. As he was growing up, what did David teach him? David taught him, seek after wisdom. Acquire wisdom. So you know what? In 1 Kings, when God comes to Solomon and asks, Solomon, what do you want? Remember what Solomon asked for? Solomon asked for wisdom. Why does he ask for wisdom there? Was it just a lucky guess? Solomon had been taught by David from youth to look after wisdom, chase wisdom, acquire wisdom. And so when he had an opportunity to ask God, he asked for wisdom. I think that's a beautiful connection for us today, that we too need to acquire wisdom as we deal with mom and dad and the kids. One last section and the lesson will be yours. If you go down to verse 20, the end of chapter 4 here, 4 verse 20. My son, give attention to my words, incline your ear to my saying. Do not let them depart from your sight. Keep them in the midst of your heart. For they are life to those who find them, and health to all of their body. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flows the spring of life. And I'd really like to end with verse 23 this evening. Watch over your heart with all diligence. You know, this child that we talked about in chapter 4, verse 1 and 2, that abandoned the instruction, they didn't watch their heart with all diligence. And young people and parents as well, let me encourage you to watch your hearts with all diligence. The conclusion of that statement, he will say in verse 23, for from it flows the spring of life. We let hatred and we let darkness fill our lives. We let our eyes become blinded. We forget about the things that we have been taught. And no longer will life flow from us, but death will. Well, let's learn these lessons from Solomon. Sons, listen. Moms, teach. And dads, give instruction. Thank you.